Despite the huge assistance that Ukraine enjoys from the part of Germany, the country has refused to provide a military assistance to Ukraine.
Our dependency on Russian gas is increasing with Nord Stream 2. If it weren't coming through Nord Stream 2, it would come through Ukraine, which I would really very much wish for Ukraine, but it would be the same amount of gas.
So this project that was signed with the Buslavets that you mentioned in the beginning of the interview is also one of the concessions.
Private opinion is that Ukraine will become a member of the EU.
There is a kind of common belief that now prevails in Ukraine that the values of Euromaidan are being let down. Do you, Madam Ambassador, believe that all the reforms implemented after the Revolution of Dignity tending to be rolled back? Do you see that?
That question is pretty easy. No, but I will elaborate on that. Let me first say, since I was here when Maidan happened, and I was in a way an active participant, spending a lot of time there, sometimes incognito, since you mentioned my Ukrainian. When I don't speak too much, you don't realize that I'm not Ukrainian. And I am sad when I see that there still has been no real accounting for the people who killed the Nebesna Sotnya. I think this is something where not only I am disappointed, most of the Ukrainians are also disappointed. This is something where I would have really hoped for quicker results so that these families can also rest in a more quieter way and remember their loved ones in a quieter way. This is something that I would always insist on, that there need to be progress there. When it comes to reforms, when you look at the 6 years that happened since the end of Maidan, so much has been achieved, really, with the help of international partners, but also because the Ukrainian people wanted it. Nevertheless, of course, it could have been more and it could have been faster. After all my years in Ukraine, I do feel that Ukrainians have a unique capacity, as I always say, to shoot themselves in the foot. They want to do something and then they somehow don't do it. There are a lot of reasons for that, and sometimes I tear my hair out, but there are a lot of reasons for it. I mean, the war is one reason, of course. It takes up a lot of money, which could be needed for other reforms. Energy, strategical thinking. Something that I find at least as difficult is the vested interest, the oligarchic system. This is something where Ukraine has made almost no progress since I came here first. These oligarchs have become big employers and they have developed and perhaps we're too impatient. Perhaps we should look at other countries where oligarchic systems lasted for 50 or 100 years and then they finished. It's just that I have the feeling the Ukrainian people don't want to wait that long, and I also would like it to be faster. So my appeal to those vested interests would be, please be employers, large employers, pay your people well, develop new economic fields, but please get out of politics. Let politicians do politics. Let the president and his team work quietly here to the benefit of the country and implement reforms. And I'm sure we come to that, the reforms that are absolutely necessary. And I think the most important one right now is judicial reform. But you need to focus on that and not be sidetracked.
Yeah. I've seen the latest poll of the European companies working in Ukraine who estimated the Ukrainian investment climate. And the first thing they mentioned is a judicial reform, not the war that affects somehow their activities here, but the judiciary. Yeah. Then again, independence of the National Bank of Ukraine, independence of anti-corruption institutions. These are the reforms that now everybody is shouting out loud that are being rolled back. But we'll see, rolling back is also a process. So
I wanted to ask about the rank of the reforms that are key in Ukraine, but I think that we have already answered that question, that the judiciary
is now the main, because as you mentioned, investment climate, There have been no more German investments basically since, I don't know, 2-3 years. We had 2 smaller ones now, which is good, but we need lighthouse projects, we need big investments in order to attract the investors that really could work in Ukraine. But they are afraid that they can't defend their cases in court.
There is the group of the ambassadors of the G7 countries, which is called G7 AMP Reform UA. So you gather together and you also meet with the representatives of the government and of the office of the president to monitor how the reforms are being implemented. Is this an efficient way to control the reforms being implemented, or are our government officials just using it to try to reassure you that everything is all right?
I'm very happy that we have an ongoing dialogue, and that we have always had this ongoing dialogue. I actually was in Ukraine working there here the last time when my ambassador came into my office and said, "Oh, now we have a G7 reform support group and I'm the president," since Germany was heading the G7 then in 2015. He didn't look pleased, I have to say. He already had a lot on his plate, but honestly, it has been an ongoing dialogue since. And in this dialogue, we could very directly make clear to the Ukrainian government, to the president, where the priorities have to lie. If Ukraine wants to fulfill its Euro-Atlantic aspirations, if it wants to fulfill everything that on Euromaidan was fought for, I think we're a good mirror for the Ukrainian government and the president to see if they're going in the right direction or not. If this is efficient, honestly, when you have 7 plus the EU countries, even coordination is sometimes not efficient, but that's not the point. I think the fact that we're continuously here working together with the Ukrainian counterparts, that is a good thing.
Let me present you the point of view of a progressive Ukrainian who looks closely at the situation in Ukraine. People of Ukraine rely on G7 ambassadors group very much, and sometimes the statements of G7 group is much more valuable than, I don't know, the statement of the presidential office for itself, that it does not always coincide with the position of some of its officials who serve there. So it's a huge influence, and Ukraine should be grateful for your efforts, the efforts of G7 ambassadors, because it means too much.
Thank you for the compliment. I'll happily transmit that also to my colleagues, because it is work
you better
also.
too, yeah.
But what I think one point I would like to make on that: never take our comments as I've just read in a WhatsApp, external management. It's not.
No,
it's meant
a signal.
to be a mirror, as I said, so that reflects what the Ukrainian government is doing, and so that they can see if they're going in the right direction or not.
Throughout its history, Germany had quite difficult times. Once been split into a couple of parts. Of course, it would be wrong to compare Germany of the end of the 22nd century and Ukraine of today. It was a different context, different times. But anyway, Germany succeeded in a way to bring peace to the nation. What are the tips from the ambassador of Germany to Ukraine, how to start this process?
You're of course right. You can never compare historical events, and Germany's separation, the Berlin Wall, is different because there was no war between our countries. People were shot at the border, yes, but the numbers were much less than people who have died in the east of Ukraine. There are a few things that perhaps can at least give good, some good advice. Something that I learned in Cuba, actually, because I was wondering how the Cuban system could have lasted for such a long time with the US being so near. The GDR never tried to prevent Germans in the East to watch Western television, West German television. Never. They never blocked it. Whereas Cuba has huge antennas, all directed at the US to block US television. I think this is one thing. East Germans knew what was going on in the world and what was going on in West Germany. For that, I find it so important that there is people-to-people contact across the contact line, that There are attempts to have a better communication policy here with a new television channel. We have a little project also where we actually print a newspaper for the elderly who live along the contact line, because they're used to paper and newspapers, where we try to give them information, real information, not fake news, no propaganda. It's a joint effort, I think. This is one thing, but people-to-people contact, what Germany didn't have was this huge numbers of people crossing the line. Honestly, we had our KPWW here also somehow. There were also not many here, but we only had a few people going back and forth, and it was mainly West Germans going to East Germany, not the other way around. Before the pandemic, you had up to 40,000 people crossing the contact line every day. I would really, really hope that the Ukrainian government understands that that is good, that only in that way you can continue fighting for hearts and minds of these people, attract them to Ukraine, to government-controlled Ukraine, show them that this country is making progress and make them want to come here.
With the war unfolding and after the Euromaidan, the interest in Ukraine, the world's interest in Ukraine seems to fall down, and there is even the concept of Ukraine fatigue. But definitely the war and the victim image are not the things that Ukrainians want to be associated with. What is the image of the country in Germany, and what are those gaps that can be filled in communications?
Of course, Ukraine is still, unfortunately, linked to things like Chernobyl, the war, corruption. This is only part of the picture, of course. I think there are fields where Ukraine can make a lot of progress in communication. One is actually tourism. I think Ukraine could be a fantastic tourist destination, especially for Germans and other Europeans who live nearby.
It's number one, of course. It's the Maidan.
Number one is also Ukraine. Pretty certain that's somewhere in the UK.
This is pretty obvious because one picture shows Asian people.
Because it's a big country with beautiful landscapes, with a much better infrastructure these days in terms of hotels, in terms of streets actually. Let's work on the trains a little bit, but even there are much better trains now. This is something that Ukraine should actively promote. Germany is hosting the world's biggest tourism fair every year, and I think this should be the first goal, and I have talked about this with the culture minister who is in charge, that should be one of the first things to do once traveling is possible again. Also because I think with the pandemic, people do not look to Asia or South America at the moment. They look for closer destinations, and Ukraine could be the perfect destinations. And then one field that is quite close to my personal female heart is fashion, actually. I think Ukraine has a really good fashion industry. I buy all my dresses here because Germany doesn't really sell nice dresses any longer. And they're so much more comfortable, I find, when you have to work the whole day.
Spotted, Rihanna and Dua Lipa in Mariana Senchina, Dakota Johnson and Emily Ratajkowski in Bevza, Bella Hadid and Kourtney Kardashian in Yankee Yankee, Demi Moore and Catherine Zeta-Jones in Vita King, and many more world-famous faces wearing the label Made in Ukraine.
Yeah, so really I need to see more Ukrainian fashion in Germany.
I need more details. Do you like famous fashion brands like Pustovit, Bevza, or small. Like Всі свої fair?
I go to Всі свої, but there's another one where I bought a few dresses, which is called Golda, which doesn't have a shop any longer, unfortunately, but only a showroom. One of our projects in the embassy is to go with all the female experts there and have a Saturday afternoon where we will see the new collection. No, I think fashion, and especially Berlin, has great fashion shows, also smaller ones, not the huge ones, where Ukrainian fashion designers could start presenting their creations. And this is such a positive and nice thing to exchange between two countries, fashion.
I have a traditional question we ask each of our guests. What is the audience of Kyiv, not Kiev, should keep in mind after they see our conversation? The main message. What would you like them to remember?
Ukraine is a great place to be. Ukraine has a lot of work to do. Ukraine has wonderful friends to help it. Let's all work together to make Ukraine a success.
think that's
That is
great.
such a pleasure to hear. Thank you very much for the interview. That was interesting, that was informative, that was very funny, that was fun. So we're coming to an end. Let's thank again our incredible guest, Her Excellency, Ambassador of Germany to Ukraine, Ms. Anka Feldhusen.
These were Tatiana Haiduk and Polina Boychuk and Kyiv, Kiev. So we remind you again to stay safe, stay kind. Remember that Kyiv is not Kiev, as you may thought, and keep in touch.
Thank you, Polina. Thank you, Tatiana.
It was our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ta-da! We're
Ta-da!
So what are the top questions you receive here? So it's
Actually,
Nord Stream.
Nord Stream is not
Nord
the question
Stream.
any longer since the agreement between Naftogaz and Gazprom that has disappeared, Nord Stream 2. It came up a little bit with Navalny, of course, because in Germany, fortunately, the discussion started at long last. I think the major questions is always about reform and how we see reform. I am the ambassador who has spent most time in Ukraine, so I can at least see some development, and I can also tell my colleagues, don't be so critical so quickly. Yeah, you can be critical, that has to be constructive criticism, but very often you will see in the past things have become better and quickly better. It just needs the right moment then. As I said, Ukraine could be faster in its achievements, but then again, perhaps we're all very impatient.